We didn't plan it or even discuss it, we just got into the habit. When our evening was coming to an end, we would sit down for a late-night drink or snack and basically summarize the day. How was your day, Suze? It was fine, dear. That was the summation of our most frequent evening conversation. Sometimes, if there was a problem, we did discuss it. But problems came up so rarely that I always looked forward to the last conversation of each day. I would look into my wife's beautiful eyes, knowing that everything had gone well and that she was truly happy. Afterwards, I always drifted easily into a cozy sleep. Over the past 3 days, our morning conversations had become increasingly strange. It wasn't about topics. We always talked about everything. No topic was off limits. It was the timing that bothered me. This was the third off-topic topic in the last few days. I put the toast on my plate and swallowed the bite I had just taken. Reaching for my coffee mug, I deliberately thought about it. "Do you know anyone with a similar marriage?" she asked. I was curious as to what led to the topic, but I wasn't too worried. Not yet, anyway. Or was she worried? Honestly, I don't know. Yes, dear. I know some people who claim to have an open marriage. The expression on my wife's face hadn't changed much. But having lived with her for almost 15 years, I knew she wasn't done asking questions. Admittedly, I was more than curious to know what she was thinking. "Do I know these friends of yours?" "Well, honey, I never said they were friends. I said I know some people. I suppose you'd recognize their names if I told you. However, I imagine you know people who think they live like that too." "Oh, good. I suppose you're right." And there it was. It was at that moment that I felt the first jolt of sadness in my chest. I saw the hesitation in her eyes. She was afraid to ask me something, to tell me something, or just hiding something. I had no idea what it was, but it was something. Unfortunately, I had a bad feeling about what it might be. The rest of my breakfast was no longer as good as it had been at the beginning. Not a word was said between us until the kids came down from their bedrooms and jumped into their chairs. Our kids were so full of energy, enthusiasm, and love that it was almost impossible to indulge in melancholy around them. So it was all giggles and smiles until it was time for me to leave for work. As I was walking out the door, she was almost whispering, "I love you, David." I know. I was surprised at how calm I felt. I didn't know anything after all. And yet I knew. She felt guilty about something and was afraid to tell me. We talked about everything. We disagreed about a lot of things. We had discussions, but not arguments. I never got mad at her, and I don't think I ever gave her a reason to be mad at me. But for the first time in my memory, I left for work without kissing my wife. Of course, there were other times when she was sick, or visiting her family, or when I was away on business. But for the most part, I started each day with a goodbye kiss and a promise to come home as soon as possible. But not on this day. The subject of our conversations bothered me, and I knew they could get ugly. My wife looked a little better than the average girl from the neighbor's yard. She had dark flowing hair that naturally curled at her shoulders, and the most beautiful blue eyes. The dimples on her cheeks when she smiled were adorable, but she had a sultry look that she could bring out to remind you that she was fully female. She looked equally good with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a baseball cap and sweatshirt, or dressed for a night out on the town in an outfit that left no room for imagination and heels that said, "Yes, you'll be lucky tonight." She always looked younger than her years. Her figure had hardly changed in 15 years and 3 children. I always knew she would maintain her looks and body. When we were dating and I first met her mother, I felt like I was meeting her older sister. And I wasn't just kind. I was genuinely shocked when I learned the truth. Later, when I seriously considered a long-term commitment, that was one factor that tipped heavily in her favor. She was by no means a beautiful model or movie star. I suspect that at first glance, most men wouldn't call her the most beautiful woman in the room. But to me, she was perfection at first sight. It was her overall attitude that was the deciding factor for me. Everyone liked Susan. All my friends, Maggie, everyone we ever met. She felt comfortable and at ease in any situation, with any group of people, and always kept a positive attitude. She was lively and outgoing and so much fun to be with. I was exactly the same when I was with her. On my own, I was more cautious and pragmatic. I would say I could best be described as an introvert, but I was by no means antisocial. Throughout my life, I had a large group of friends. But Susan was pretty much the first person I told all my secrets to. I didn't hide anything from her. I didn't even think about it. I got off the elevator a few minutes late, managing to stop by the department heads and say a quick hello. Pretty standard for a Friday morning. "Everything okay, Mr. Stevens?" my assistant asked as I entered my office. "As well as can be expected, Miss Davis," I replied thoughtfully. She threw me a brief glance and then quickly went back to what she had been doing before I came in. 15 minutes later, Rebecca Davis was in my office with a day planner in hand, ready to go over the day's schedule. Sales will be in the conference room in 30 minutes. You have a conference call with King Pharmaceutical at 10 o'clock. And Mr. Sloan from Kipling Manufacturing expects your call at 11 o'clock. She looked at me almost sadly. Would you like to go over the schedule for the afternoon now, Mr. Stevens? I sighed, looking out my office window at the sprawling square below. Miss Davis and I were going over the afternoon schedule right after noon practice when we had lunch together in my office. For 10 years now, Miss Davis and I had eaten lunch together in my office. I clearly wasn't as good at hiding my thoughts as I thought I was. But then again, Miss Davis had always been invaluable in anticipating my every need. That was why she was paid as much as some of the senior staff. Reschedule anything that isn't urgent for next week, please. Right away, sir. She stood up as if on a mission and strode briskly to the door. Becky. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. Yes, sir. I need to see Maggie. First thing this afternoon. I'm sure if she hadn't been facing the door, the expression on her face would have matched the shocked sigh I heard. I'll take care of it, Mr. Stevens. She then quickly walked out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Margaret Peterson was my closest friend. Our families lived across the street from each other. Since third grade, when her family moved into our neighborhood, she had been my study partner, my date to almost every school function, and even my date to the prom. She taught me to understand what loyalty and friendship are and, perhaps without realizing it herself, taught me to love unconditionally. In high school, I was gratuitously determined. Maggie was too. She wanted to be a lawyer. Our shared goal meant we had to get into great schools, graduating at the top of our class. She pushed me to be the best. I pushed her to pursue the great goals I knew she was capable of. I wasn't interested in any high school romances. Neither was Maggie. I didn't want her to be distracted from my goals. She wasn't interested in dating boys. But that didn't mean we didn't have fun. There were sports and drama and choir and student council and clubs and committees. We wanted to experience everything, and we did. The time that other kids spent on dates and parties, we spent on extracurricular activities. We had a blast. I was captain of the basketball team, student council president, salutatorian, and prom king. Maggie was valedictorian of the class, captain of the debate and soccer teams, and yearbook editor. I'm pretty sure she was the one who left her skateboard on the sidewalk at the foot of the steps I tripped over my freshman year. It was the day before our physical fitness test. A swollen ankle slowed me down enough that I got a B+ in freshman physical education, which I could have made up for in summer school, but didn't, and I was .02 short of Maggie's perfect 4.0 grade point average. But alas, I was never able to find any tangible evidence that I was right. Maggie never told me she was gay. She didn't have to. But she wasn't interested in guys. I knew that for a fact. We never talked about it or even hinted at it. I just knew, and she knew I knew, and our shared secret made us closer. If it's possible to be closer than just inseparable. I always thought I was her cover to get through high school without ridicule or teasing. It didn't bother me one bit. She was my cover too. I never had to answer ridiculous questions about why I didn't date or if I was gay. No one questioned why I only dated Margaret Peterson, the gorgeous blonde bombshell. And she was too. Gorgeous, I mean. My lifelong friend was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. Perfect blonde hair, perfect green eyes. To anyone who looked at us from the outside, it seemed like we were just an ordinary couple. We held hands and hugged often. We would sit close together. I would put my arm around her, or she would lay her head on my shoulder with her arms wrapped around me. The most meaningful was the day I said goodbye to her as she was leaving for Stanford. Thank you for everything, David. No one will ever understand why or how much I love you. You will always be my closest friend, she whispered in my ear. She then took my face in her hands and kissed me. It was 7 years before I saw her again. Before I continue, I hope you don't get the wrong impression. I was not a geek as a kid. Not even close. Sure, I had an awkward boy phase, but it didn't last any longer than usual. No, I graduated high school as a regular hometown hero in the suburbs. By the time I left home, I was 6 feet 4 inches, 210 pounds of lean, handsome build with curly brown hair and brown eyes. I was confident, smart, charming, and ready to tackle the world. My parents were stable, supportive, and successful people who taught me the most important lessons in life. Work hard, be humble, be honest with myself and others, and treat people with respect. It wasn't that I couldn't date in high school. It was that I chose not to date. That probably would have surprised some people, even my dad. Before I left for college, my dad sat me down at the table for one of our man talks. Davy, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to tell you how proud Mom and I are of you. You have become the young man I always hoped you would become. I love you very much. Thanks, Dad. I have one question for you, son. Your mother threatened me with a year on the couch if I didn't have this conversation with you before you went to the next world. So here goes. Are you a virgin? Yes, Dad. I had long since stopped feeling awkward during one of my father's conversations about alcohol, bad habits, and now sex as well. I was never warned what the conversation would be about, although I could usually make an educated guess. I never got in trouble for answering his questions honestly. I quickly realized that he only wanted the best for me and was eager to help me in any way he could. He couldn't help me if he didn't know the truth and never embarrassed me about my answers, even if he didn't like them. He never judged me and always tried to give me solutions to problems that I was comfortable with. It just worked for us. Okay, I'll admit I'm surprised to hear that, even though your mom told me that was the case. Considering how much time you and Margaret spent together, I was pretty sure your answer would be different. For a second, he seemed to hesitate whether to continue. May I ask why? I'm not gay, Dad. It was imperceptible, but there was a very small sigh of relief. Can I ask you a question, Dad? You know you can ask me anything, Davy. Do you consider your mom your equal? David, your mom is far superior to me in almost every way. When you were in high school, did you meet a girl like her? No, David. There was no one in my school who looked like your mother. I honestly didn't think there was anyone so perfect for me until I met her in college. I know what you mean. I've been thinking a lot about what I want my life to be. I look at you and Mom as the gold standard. I want to be as successful and content with my life as you are. I want to share my life with someone as beautiful, smart, and strong as my mom. I honestly thought my father was about to cry. Either he was or he was suddenly imagining things. I've met someone almost perfect for me, Dad. I've never met anyone as close to perfect as Mags. Or as beautiful. I know, Papa, I know. She's a babe, no doubt about it. And she's my best friend. Always has been and always will be. I love her with all my heart, unconditionally and without reservation. But we'll never love each other. I must have missed something, son. You said Margaret was perfect for... Almost perfect, Dad. And our differences would be insurmountable, Dad. Margaret is a lesbian. Boys don't interest her. Oh. Mom and Maggie made me set incredibly high standards. I know they did. But since no girl could meet those standards, intimacy with one of them seemed like a risk to me, involving a lot of unpleasantness, like pregnancy or STDs, with no real benefits. For me, it was too much of a risk for the sake of short-term gratification. I'm not going to save myself up for the one, but I will wait as long as it takes to find someone with potential. Hopefully, I won't have to wait too long. My father broke out into a huge laugh and seemed to regain his equilibrium. Well, I guess your mom was right. You might need my speech, which luckily for you is short. I think it goes without saying for you, but it never hurts to be sure. David, never lie to a young lady just to amuse yourself. I think if you're honest and considerate of a girl's feelings, you'll have the opportunity to have many memorable experiences. If not, I think you'll be very dissatisfied with the results. That goes without saying, Dad. But thank you for thinking of me. Well, I suppose I'd better go and eat some crow. I don't know how your mother knows everything, but eventually I'll learn to stop doubting it. Someday soon, Dad? Probably not anytime soon yet, David. How good is my prenup, Maggie? What are you talking about? About shit. Well, maybe it's crap. And maybe it isn't. But I think it's best if you start looking into it, though. I'm guessing it's been a while since you've looked into it. No, David. I haven't looked. Are you sure? I turned away from the window I was looking out of again to meet her gaze. She was looking straight into my eyes. Do you think, Mags, you can find out what a person is thinking just by looking into their eyes? Well, no. Not everyone. Just you, David. Yeah, I know what you mean. It only works for me with you and Susan. Until this morning, I thought it was one of the coolest things in my life. Now I'm not so sure. Maggie tilted her head slightly to look at him again. Did you start all this because you saw something in her eyes, David? Yes. Okay. College has turned out to be everything I expected, a few things I hoped for, and has taken my life in a completely different direction than I had planned. Maggie and I talked on the phone for at least an hour each week. For important events, I sent her a letter or card. Even at 2,600 miles away, she was my best friend. I loved it on the East Coast and quickly made new friends with different interests. I studied, had fun, and dove headfirst into college life. Yes, Harvard was the right fit for me. On the flip side, I could write an entire series about my adventures at Harvard. My virginity only lasted 2.5 weeks. In any case, there were plenty of women there with potential, and I began my search for a life partner almost immediately. Almost no weekend was without some special event, and I rarely attended an event without a date. One of my friends with benefits explained to me after our date at the Boston Fireworks Orchestra that I had developed quite a reputation. I was intrigued and wanted to know more. David, you make every woman feel unique and special. You never try to be something you're not. And you don't force women to be something they're not. And you're so damn good, she giggled. You want to spend a romantic evening with someone and be treated like a princess? Go to David's. You want to watch a soccer game and be treated like one of the guys? David is your man. I don't know what to say to that, Stacy. It's very flattering, but I think it was probably all more luck than skill. I'm not exactly a Casanova here. Oh, you have skills, David, she blushed. I just wanted you to know on behalf of the women's student body that you give us hope that not all handsome men are arrogant assholes. And that Mr. Perfect really does exist. Well, thank you, Stacy. It really boosts my ego. But you know I'm only interested in one woman's body right now. And that's exactly why, David, as soon as we get to my apartment, that pretty much sums up my college experience. Finding a willing partner was never a problem. I was forthright and honest with all of my companions. I never said unnecessary things or shared anyone's secrets. I treated women with respect, and so it seemed that I could do no wrong. My dream of becoming a lawyer turned out to be not so successful. I abandoned that dream, rather rudely, in favor of a new, more beautiful dream. Computers. I found that I preferred problem-solving to negotiation, coding to debate, and finding uses for the latest technology to almost anything. Admittedly, I was a bit obsessed with the new love of my life. Oh, the possibilities. So, after 4 years at Harvard, I said goodbye to my dream of Yale Law School and said hello to MIT and an MBA. It was a bit unusual for someone who came in with such limited real-world experience. Giving up my summer vacation for internships certainly went in my favor. I'd like to say that it was my academic reputation and interviewing skills that got me internships at 4 of Boston's largest employers. But honestly, I think it had more to do with the fact that I was going up against everyone. Hundreds of students were vying for the chance to be the next financial wonderkind, partner, or big shot. But it often felt like I was the only one who wanted the chance to learn how a company's IT department worked. By the time I graduated from Harvard with honors, my resume included a consulting firm, a hospital, a law firm, and a multinational bank. I spent the next 2.5 years at MIT studying innovation and emerging technologies, business, and entrepreneurship. It was fast-paced, fun, and exhausting. I didn't have breaks, I had internships. But I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to own my own company so I could control my own destiny. But I didn't know how to finance my brilliant plan, and I was sure I was going to wallow in despair in my own cubicle, pinching off every penny so shareholders could get a nice dividend, and waiting for a chance to realize my dream. It didn't quite work out that way. I met Susan during my last summer internship after MIT in the pediatric ward of a hospital. She was a nurse and very pretty. Hi, I'm from the information technology department. Someone called about computer problems? Her smile lit up the room. Oh, thank goodness. I have no idea what I've done, but I'm sure it's bad. I can't access the patient files. It's like they've disappeared. Well, let's take a look. Shall we? I tried not to look, but it was hard. She was glowing all over, and suddenly I felt a surge of energy I could barely contain. I needed to do a good job. I needed to impress her. Her name? I needed her name. By the way, my name is David Stevens. I'll be solving all your problems today. She giggled. Susan White, and I'll be the eternally grateful person looking over your shoulder. Her blue eyes sparkled as she spoke. I heard a soft melody tinkling in the air. I thought it was angels singing to let me know that one of them was in my presence. It was her pager. Oh, it's for me. Excuse me. I need to check on a patient. I'll be right back. Fortunately, her problem was easy to diagnose. Someone had accidentally deleted some files from her desktop, causing her to be unable to access the patient database. I didn't think it was her fault, since the timestamp on the deleted files had been affixed hours earlier. I went to the backup server, restored the missing files, and watched Susan. She was like a vision. She moved around the patient's bed with a reassuring smile. She stopped to take the hand of a little girl before leaving. She took the time to explain her actions to the girl's distraught parents. You could feel the tension in the room ease as she completed her tasks. Then she returned. Sorry about that. Duty calls. What time did your shift start? I'm sorry, what? When did you start working today? About 30 minutes ago. Well then, I'm happy to report that your problem has been fixed and that you were not the cause of the problem. There's that smile again. Wow. I had to remember to breathe. Oh my God, really? She turned to her terminal and started typing. Yes. Oh, you're quite the lifesaver, aren't you? No, Suze. I think that's your job. I just help with the computers. This time, as she slowly turned to me, an appreciative grin appeared on her face. I smiled back. Thanks, David. You're very sweet. That was the end of the first meeting with my future wife. I returned to my department with a proposal to change the permissions of some important network files and with a heart overflowing with joy. Susan was usually a confident, caring, and loving person. But when she realized she was wrong, she couldn't muster up the courage to be honest with me. It only happened twice, on two minor inconsequential occasions. Once she forgot to make a reservation at my favorite restaurant for my birthday. The other time, she rear-ended an SUV into my anniversary present, a brand new VW Beetle convertible, after a full day of shopping at the mall. Her cover-ups were almost comical. She really wanted to try a new restaurant. Doesn't sushi sound exciting? She forgot to put gas in the tank and didn't want to risk getting stranded on the side of the road. Maybe we could just take my car to the parent-teacher conference? I guess I could take that as a warning of serious problems to come. But would you? Two minor problems in almost 15 years of marriage. No, I don't think so. I wasn't afraid to go back to my house. But I didn't know what to expect. I'd spent most of the day alone with my thoughts, a luxury of being the boss. I knew Susan would be willing to make another attempt to tell me what was on her mind, but in doing so, she wouldn't have to tell me what was on her mind. I also knew that our next trek to the truth was waiting for me at home, but I have to admit that her tactics surprised me. I walked into a quiet house, which was completely out of the ordinary. No children, no dinner. Only the faint sounds of music coming from the terrace outside alerted me to the fact that someone was home. As I opened the sliding door leading to the deck, I was surprised to realize that I was the one who would have to put an end to this farce. Susan was going to keep escalating the situation until she felt she could live with the guilt. Good afternoon, Shannon, I said to my sister-in-law. Well, hello, Dave. It's been a while. Well, some parts I've never seen. Come on, Dave. Once you've seen one couple, you've seen them all. Where are the kids, Susan? They're spending the night at my parents' house, David. You see, Shannon and I were feeling a little naughty and definitely didn't want to worry about tan lines. Just a day of fun and sun by the pool for us girls. Yeah, okay, I replied. I tried to look into her eyes, but the mirrored Ray-Ban sunglasses tried their best to obscure my view. This went on long enough. 3 days. Have you ever fantasized about other women? Do you know anyone with an open marriage? I sighed, trying to strengthen my resolve. Susan, do you love him? Shannon nearly jumped out of the chaise lounge. Her mouth was open in shock. What? You're talking about David? Hissed my wife. I knew this was the worst-case scenario. The beautiful, confident woman who had been my wife had been replaced by a slut with quivering lips. Well, Susan, I can see that you're not ready to tell me what's really been bothering you the last 3 days. So I guess I'll have to wait. But I don't want to be misunderstood. Okay? I'd never been so angry or so nauseous before. I wanted to reach up and grab her until all the pain in my gut choked. But I would never do that. I couldn't. Oh, shit, sighed Shannon. Her mouth was still open. David, I... A single solitary tear was now dripping from her cheek. But I didn't care at all. I was close to losing control of the situation. It was time to leave before I left myself in a position of no options. I'll be back on Monday. Take care of all the fun and sunshine you need. But be ready to talk when I get back. It was amazing how a tan day could turn into an ashy white look with just a little panic. It was good to see you, Shannon. I'm sorry to be leaving so soon. Oh, and nice tits. Thanks for sharing. Her mouth was closed, but a blush appeared. I got up and headed back into the house, stopping at the door. I could hear Susan snorting, trying to keep from crying. By the way, Susan, I addressed her once more. She didn't even try to look at me. When I get even, it will be on my terms, not yours. I stepped into the house and started to close the door. Bitch! I think the first sound I heard was vomit from the day's margaritas I'd drunk. It was hard to tell. I was pretty sure the second sound was her sobs, gasping between wails. I know for a fact that it was Shannon who said, Jesus, Susan. What the hell have you done? I spent the better part of a week working up the courage to ask Susan White out on a date. This was quite unusual for me. I was not lacking in confidence. I'd asked out many beautiful women and had rarely been turned down. But for some reason, I wanted everything to be perfect, and I was deathly afraid of rejection. As it turned out, I had nothing to worry about. Excuse me. David? Her angelic voice snapped me out of the day's reverie. I stared at her smiling face for probably the better part of an hour. Okay, maybe just a few seconds. Hi. David, I need a favor. Anything for you, Suze? There was that smile again. I was hooked. No doubt about it. One of the other pediatric nurses is getting married this weekend, and I need a date. Would you like to be my chaperone? I'd be honored. Just like that, I found myself in the doorway of my future wife's first-floor apartment. Our first date. I know it was crazy, even I would tell you that. But I just knew. Hello, David. Hello, beautiful. Shall we go? Lead the way, kind sir. The wedding was tasteful, but without much happening. I sat next to Susan, occasionally holding her hand. I hardly took my eyes off her. She glanced at me occasionally, always with a smile on her face. At the reception at the restaurant, Susan really shined. She was the heart of the party. She wasn't the center of attention and never sought to be the center of attention, but she moved casually from group to group and left each one smiling and laughing. I think the reception would have died quickly if Susan hadn't kept the blood flowing. Sometimes I followed her around like a lost puppy, and sometimes I hung around with a group of guys at the bar exchanging opinions. I turned down a dozen ladies asking for a dance. I'm sorry. I'm just waiting for Susan to come back, I repeated over and over in my most polite voice. As the evening wore on and the dance floor filled up, Susan returned, smiling at me. I'm not sure I was prepared to defend my turf against so many ladies this evening, Mr. Stevens. What do you mean, Miss White? It seems I've unknowingly taken a most eligible bachelor off the market, and several of the young ladies here aren't too pleased. She lowered her head. I'm sorry I left you here alone, David. You didn't have to wait for me. And you could have danced with anyone, of course. I plan to dance with whoever I like, Suze. And I'll wait until you're ready to be asked out on the dance floor. Okay, then. She smirked slightly and took my hand. I didn't let her go for the rest of the evening. Fast songs, slow songs. We decided to walk back to her apartment. It wasn't that far. We chatted as we walked. About everything. Nothing. It was wonderful. When the moment of truth came, she kissed me on the lips. David, She looked like she was considering something, but was a little unsure. After an almost awkward moment, she calmed down and continued. David, I'd like to invite you inside because I know I don't want this evening to end. But I don't want you to get the wrong impression of me. I guess I'm struggling with my own thoughts right now. Can I say something? Of course. Good. I just want you to know that I'm fully prepared to defend my territory against any gentleman who calls, because I will definitely take you off the market for good. And if you invite me in, I promise to stop for just a brief moment of gratitude before I start making sure you never regret doing it. We had been dating nonstop for 3 months when my life changed forever. And not in the way I had hoped. From the airport, I went straight to the office. My flight from New York brought me to Chicago just before noon. I devoted the weekend to my favorite hobby, listening to rock bands from Poughkeepsie at various venues. Miss Davis drove me out of Chicago within an hour of leaving my wife and her sister Friday night. It was a very good time frame considering I had warned her about it. Some people say that the pop-punk sound in Southern California is the best thing since sliced bread, and they have the album sales numbers to prove it. I say these people don't know shit. In my opinion, the greatest bands of our generation came out of Poughkeepsie, and I was very relaxed. It wasn't quite like my college years, and I felt a little out of place as I was closer to 40 and not so close to 20. But I was there to listen to music, not to party. So the weekend lived up to its purpose. When I got to the office, Maggie was waiting for me at the conference table. Miss Davis had already ordered us lunch. Maggie was lovely as always. I was glad she was my friend. I was even happier that she was my lawyer. I had cheated on my dream a long time ago, but Maggie hadn't. She was the best of the best. Detailed, dedicated, and ruthless. Her firm handled all of our contracts, and she handled my cases personally. I don't want to be a weekend dad, Maggie. At the very least, I want to share custody of the kids. Straight to the point, eh, David? Well, Mags, you've had almost 72 hours, so I'm sure you know more than I do. Why don't you tell me? She looked at me for a long time before she spoke. It was a very short affair, David. Short enough to satisfy you, Maggie? There must have been something very interesting lying on the table that Maggie needed to study. Finally, she whispered. No, David. I know she's your friend, Maggie. I'm so sorry. Jesus, David. Why the hell do you care about my feelings? Because I love you, Mags. Always have. And I always will. She's such an idiot. She's not getting anything, David. What a stupid bitch. God, listen to me on my soapbox. I'm so sorry. Maggie? Yes, David? Who? It was the 3rd year of our marriage when we had our first serious argument that didn't involve a fight. Susan wanted to talk about something. As usual, she was calm and collected. Sitting across the table from me and sipping a glass of wine, she began, "You know I'd never be confused with a supermodel, don't you, David? Only to those who aren't looking at you through my eyes, Suze. I have no doubt that you are a supermodel." She blushed and smiled. My God, she was beautiful. I mean, David, I could never compete with the models and actresses that surround you every day. And frankly, I don't even want to try. I understood what this was all about. As my company's reputation began to take shape, I decided to make sure we took the most active role in supporting any worthy charitable organization in the community. And I don't just mean sponsorships and checks. I mean active participation and, most importantly, volunteer work. I encouraged our employees to get involved in the best way I knew how. I demanded more of myself than I demanded of anyone else. Susan and I spent almost all of our free time volunteering with literacy groups, child advocates, performing arts organizations, and almost every community event. Our volunteer work gave our company a prominent place in the community and allowed me to make acquaintances throughout Chicago and beyond. Our employees felt more connected to the community, and our clients were better informed about what they needed to be successful in our area. But most importantly for me, I was able to do what I love to do. Spending time with my Susan. I was able to share her with the world and let everyone know how lucky I really am. Every weekend was another opportunity for Susan and I to go on an adventure without leaving her newly hometown. But it had its downsides. The more we were out in the open, the more I got picked on. Even when Susan was around me, which she almost always was. Mostly it was subtle hints, which I'd rejected for most of my adult life. But lately, many of the attempts could best be described as outright propositions. For example, one weekend, a hired model who had just stepped off the stage after presenting a deserving family with a check symbolizing free groceries for a year turned to me. She handed me her business card and said, "I think we would have an incredible night. Give me a call if you'd like to inquire. Your wife can even watch if you want." Then she spun on her heels and walked away. I turned to Susan and laughed, tossing the business card into the trash can. "What do you think she meant, Suze?" Susan smiled, but her giggle reflected the absolute shock that both she and I were feeling. "Oh, I think you know, dear." "Well, I'm only a man, Suz. So forgive me if sometimes I have to ask for help when these things need clarification." I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her against me as we walked to the parking lot. I held her hand all the way home. "There's no rivalry, honey. There never will be. Everything I am is yours. Forever. David, I don't want to whine, but you should know how handsome you are. Jesus, Dave. You attract girls like hell. And damn it, I'm me. Don't you ever feel like you've settled down?" "No, honey." The thought never crossed my mind. "David, I know I'm being a bitch, but make me understand. Make me believe you. Please." "It would be my pleasure, sweetheart. Suze, I've been looking for you for years. From the minute I left home after school until the day I met you, I was on a mission. To find the person who would make me as happy as my mom was to my dad. It was one of the last things he and I seriously talked about, right after he was about to ask me if I was gay. I had to chuckle at that memory. I wanted a woman who would be my partner. Someone smart, funny, and beautiful. I wanted a woman who would make me become a better person. And I stopped looking the day I met you. From the very first moment I saw you, I knew you were the one. No one before you I've ever felt this way about, and certainly no one since I met you. Suze, you're perfect for me. I adore absolutely everything about you." I paused briefly to gently kiss the back of her hand. "I know it must be a little uncomfortable for you to see the way some women act around me. And I'm not going to belittle you and say I don't get proposed to every day, because I do. But it might be helpful for you to know what I think about every day. I'd really like to know, David. Every day I wake up and look over to make sure you're still by my side. And when I see your face for the first time in my life, I say a prayer, thanking God for bringing you into my life and asking Him to guide me to make each day of your life better than the last. And then I go out into the real world, following my most important and only ironclad rule, to be totally committed to you. Every action I take, every decision I make must meet one simple threshold. Would Susan be proud of me? I'm no saint, Suze, and certainly not a monk. I appreciate beautiful women as much as any other bastard. But I know one thing. I've never liked any woman the way I like you. As my father used to say, I guess it goes without saying for you, but it never hurts to be sure. Suze, I can make you this promise on my parents' graves. I will never cheat on you or do anything to embarrass you or make you ashamed of me. Never. And someday, when you give me children, I promise to treat them with the same love, devotion, and respect that I have for you. It's the only way to live that I know, Suze. That goes without saying, David. Her eyes were burning now. I had been watching them throughout my little speech. Her sparkling blue eyes changed from concerned, touched, loving to fiery, a sure sign that I was about to get lucky. Such fire in her eyes I'd never seen before, but I liked it. I'm not sure if it happened that very first time or if our first child was conceived one of a dozen other times. Maggie was the one who called me. She was in her first year of practice in Chicago. David, you need to come home. I miss you too, Maggie, but I wasn't planning on coming home until Christmas. It's been almost 7 years, Mags. It'll be a few more months. It's today, David. You have to come home. Today. She seemed to be on the verge of tears. Maggie, what's wrong? Oh, David. I'm so sorry. She was definitely crying now. Whatever it is, Maggie. I'll take care of it. You tell me what's wrong and I'll fix it. Anything at all. No secrets, no worries, Maggie. Oh, David. I love you. Very much. But that's not my problem, honey. She was silent for a long moment. David, your mom and dad died in a car accident last night. What? Mags, I think I misunderstood. They're gone, David. I'm so sorry. From that moment on, I became a zombie. Susan told me later that I didn't utter a word for almost 2 hours. And then I just mumbled, I'm going home. In a panic, she dialed a number on caller ID and spoke to Maggie, whom she had never seen. She then helped me pack and drove me to the airport. She said she didn't think I would make it to the gate on my own, so she waited for me at the security checkpoint for an hour after my plane was scheduled to depart to make sure I didn't leave the terminal. I don't remember much about that day, but I do remember seeing Maggie for the first time in 7 years. She was still a gorgeous woman. I was sad that this was how we had to be reunited, but at the same time I was relieved that I wasn't alone. Our first hug near baggage claim lasted a few minutes. Maggie later told me that she held me until I stopped crying. The next 4 days passed like a blur. It seemed like I signed 1,000 documents. I met with representatives from the funeral home, the cemetery, insurance agents, hospital staff, police, and lawyers. Oh, lawyers. I was never so sure that Maggie had chosen the right career path, and I was grateful that I had chosen a different path. Maggie fiercely defended my interests. Apparently, my interests had expanded greatly. I always knew my mom and dad had money, but we never talked about it. I never asked for much. I never wanted my own car. I was too busy to spend a lot of money, but my parents always paid for the occasional trip to the movies or a concert. On Sunday mornings after church, I cleaned the offices of my dad's accounting firm to make a little extra money, though I never used it. During the summer, I stuffed envelopes, made copies, and ran various errands for his firm. My spring break coincided with my father's busiest time at the office. I always had a lot of work to do. By the time I graduated from high school, I had worked for my father part-time for almost 6 years and had never spent a dime. I never needed it. But it came in handy during my 4 years at Harvard. Along with summer internships, I always had enough money for expenses to keep any college student happy. And I was happy. Another clue would have to be my parents' habits. Every year we took 2 fantastic family vacations. One during Christmas vacation and one the week before school started. The Great Barrier Reef, almost every country in Europe, New York, Los Angeles, and of course Disneyland when I was a kid. I traveled the world with my parents, but never gave much thought to the expense. Finally, we never needed anything. If the family decided we needed something, we discussed the options, looked for the best available solution, and made the purchase. My family life was simple and predictable, so major purchases were rare. I just never knew. But now it all became clear to me. My father owned his own firm and was apparently a very good accountant. And my parents were rich. Unfortunately, this meant that I was now loaded beyond measure. I asked God if I gave it all away, would he allow my parents to come home? He never answered. My parents were buried on Thursday. There is nothing more I can say about it. After the funeral, I was mentally and physically exhausted. I needed a break. Maggie, can you take care of the rest for me? I can and I will, David. One last question. Are you planning to get married anytime soon? Yes, Mags. I think I do. Does it matter? Good for you, David. I hope she's as special as you are. And yes, it is important. Thank you, Maggie. Have I told you lately that you're my best friend? At least once a week since we turned 8, honey. Well, that doesn't seem to be enough. I love you, Mags. I love you too, David. The house seemed cold. It was completely quiet again, probably only the third or fourth time since we had moved in. I loved this house. It was the only house I had ever truly known. But walking into the house was almost creepy. Almost like the day I found out my parents were dead, only worse. The main floor looked like it hadn't been used in days. It was dark and felt empty. I almost missed it as I started up the stairs. Susan was sitting quietly on the couch looking at our family portrait hanging over the fireplace. The picture had been taken 2 years earlier, and if I could brag for a minute, we looked good. My son took after my example, and the twins looked like their mother. It was such a fun day. Taking pictures at the park. Hi, Susan. Hi, honey. Where are the kids? Still with my parents, David. Susan looked like warmed over death. She had huge bags under her eyes. Her cheeks were puffy and red. It looked like her hair hadn't been brushed in days and her makeup had been long forgotten. She was dressed in my Harvard sweatshirt and MIT pajama pants. They almost swallowed her whole. Are you ready to talk to me, Susan? I think so. Good then. You have one chance, Susan. I really do. All of it. No secrets. No excuses. I know, David. I have no excuses anyway. David, I cheated on you. It seemed to be unemotional to her. She barely moved. The expression on her face didn't change. She just looked saddened. Deep sadness. Probably everything she cried out wasn't just a facial expression. At least she didn't hide it. Maybe at least there was hope in that. How long? It's been 2 weeks, David. You were in Las Vegas for the convention. The steering committee was finalizing the last plans for the groundbreaking of the new shelter. We finished late one night and went over to Great Street for dinner. I knew I shouldn't drink wine, but that didn't stop me. I knew that when everyone left, I should have gotten myself a cab. I was making all the wrong decisions. Did you bring him into the house, Susan? God, no, David. He got a hotel room. And where were the kids? With my parents. I called and asked if they could stay when I realized I shouldn't drive. Well, that's already good. Yeah, I know, she sighed. So, was he better than me? She finally moved, wrinkling her nose at my question. Okay, David, okay. That's enough. I get it. My life is ruined because I let Mike Thomas give me the worst day of my life. I stared at her for a while. She was emotional now, flustered. Even beautiful now that the colors had returned to her face. But I had my own answer. Perhaps she deserved another chance. Is that it, Susan? Yes, David. I'm sorry. Perhaps there was no hope. Okay, Susan. Okay? Yeah, fine. Nothing left but the details. David, I'm so sorry. It will never happen again. I'll do anything to make it up to you. She was beginning to ramble. Don't worry about it. Wait, what? I said don't worry about it, Susan. I'll stay away from the house for the rest of the week. I'll let the kids know where I am if they need anything. I'll be back on Saturday. I got up to look at the portrait again and smiled. This was such a good day. Oh, David. That's wonderful, honey. It will be so nice to have you home. I've missed you. By the way, I'm also going to get tested for STDs. You should probably figure that out too. Big Mike being a sodomizer and all. Jesus, David. I'm really, really sorry. I wasn't thinking. I was already heading for the door when I remembered some other things she needed to know. Oh, well, I've always been more inclined toward the big picture. Those damn details always get in the way. Yes, Susan. I know. Anyway, Maggie will be in touch. The accounts are frozen, but she'll make sure you have enough money to get where you're going. What do you mean going? Where am I going? Well, I don't know, Susan. All I know is that Maggie said she'll have you out of the house by Friday. And where you're going is probably one of those decisions you're so good at making. No, 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 no. Susan. I wasn't sure she was listening to me anymore. But she stopped yelling long enough to look at me. If you want Mike to help you move, have him get Jason Smith to help. Since you don't remember, have him tell you what he was doing while Big Mike was giving you a terrible day. No, David, no. Please wait. It wasn't my fault. Please, oh God, I'm going to throw up. I don't know if she ended up throwing up. I didn't stick around to find out. But as I was closing the door, things didn't look good. The restaurant was a pretty romantic setting. It was much quieter than it had been on our first date. But then again, there weren't 60 drunk wedding guests here in the midst of the celebration. The DJ lights and sound system had been replaced with candles and a jazz pianist. But Susan remained the same, radiating beauty and grace wherever she went. Dinner was a relaxed affair, but I was very nervous. I couldn't find an easy way to start, so I got straight to the point. Suze, I think I should go into my father's business. I've given it a lot of thought, and although it's an accounting firm now, I think it could be turned into the company I've dreamed of. The current clientele would provide a steady income while we diversify, and we can leverage our current client relationships to add a new line of services. I had a hard time figuring out what I had done wrong. I always wanted Susan's opinion on the big decisions that were affecting our lives. Of course, we had only been together for 6 months and there weren't many important decisions. But after talking to her, I turned down the hospital's offer of a full-time job in favor of a new position at the bank. After another conversation between us, I gave up my apartment lease and moved in with Susan. But she looked devastated. David, I thought we were getting along so well. I can work on what's bothering you. I can change, I promise. Suze, what are you talking about? Please, David. Don't leave me. I love you. Wow, honey. What makes you think that? What makes you think I'm leaving you? You said you were going back to Chicago. No, honey. I said I was thinking about taking over my father's company. I wanted to get your opinion. I would never have made such an important decision without hearing your thoughts. She still looked like I just kicked her in the stomach. But she was coming around. Well, I think I may have done it out of line. I apologize, honey. It's my first time. Things weren't going as planned, but life doesn't stand still. It was time to try and save the day. I waved at the maitre d', and he signaled the pianist to change the song. Slowly, the waiters stopped at our table, each leaving one red rose for Susan. Finally, I stood up, fumbled for the box in my pocket, and dropped to my knee. Suze, from the first moment I met you, I knew you were my one and only. Every day spent with you only confirms what I've always known. I love you with all my heart. I will be a good husband to you, Suze, and show you in every way possible how special you are to me. Susan, will you marry me? The look that made my stomach ache was replaced by shock. I started to wonder if I'd made a giant mistake, but the flash of the camera saved me. Susan blinked, trying to get used to the dim lighting of the room. Then she looked in the direction of the flash and saw her family. Her dad, mom, and sister standing, peering out from behind a low partition, trying to get a better look at her. Her mom was smiling and crying, holding her camera and waiting to capture the big moment. It didn't take long. Susan grabbed me. Right in the middle of the restaurant. I'm a man and I've always thought I could stay on my feet if I wanted to fight. Opinions differ. At least I held on to the ring. Yes. Oh, David. Yes. Yes, my love. My pride would be restored. I had my Susan. Hi, Susan. Hi, Shannon. It's good to see you again. I'm so sorry it happened under these circumstances. May I come in? Please. Come in. Come in, the sister said as she let Maggie through the door. May I have a moment alone with Susan, please? Of course, of course. Margaret Peterson was a stunningly beautiful woman, even dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. She looked at me with a look that said, I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do to help you. I'm not here as a lawyer, Susan. I'm here as your friend. I just came to make sure you're okay. I didn't think it was possible to feel any worse. But I was beginning to realize that there were actually worse things than being a piece of shit. I betrayed her best friend, and she came to my sister's house to make sure I was going to be okay. It was so much like her. I'm not sure if she adopted that trait from David or if he adopted it from her. More likely they learned it from each other. It was one of many traits they had in common. My friends told me at first that I should be careful with Maggie, that she would eventually try to steal my David. But it's hard to be jealous of someone who always has your best interests at heart. Whenever I needed a friend, Maggie was always at my side, ready to stand up for the world. This case was no exception, but there was no way to fix it. He doesn't love me anymore. Oh, Susan. Of course he loves you. He loved you with everything he has from the first moment you met. You can't just turn that off. Well, he'll never forgive me. Not after what I did. Oh, silly woman. Of course he'll forgive you. I'm pretty sure he's already forgiven. I'm just as sure of his forgiveness as I am that you didn't tell him everything. I had to smile. She knew him better than anyone. And she knew me too. He would forgive me. She was right. Susan, he will forgive you. But he'll never forget. I know, Maggie. I know. She hugged me while I cried. Long, into the night, without judgment. It's going to get better, honey. It's going to be okay. My first introduction to feminine wiles came shortly after the proposal. Apparently, behind the scenes, they started planning a wedding about 2 months into our relationship. Susan, her mom, sister, and a few friends had been given secret missions and had been in attack mode for quite some time. Less than 2 months after my proposal, the time had come. Maggie came to Boston the week before the wedding to handle all the details surrounding my parents' business and our new life in Chicago. I can honestly say that I had no idea what I was signing. I can also say that I trusted Maggie with my life, so I didn't care. All I cared about was that my arm hurt when we were done. Maggie and Susan spent a whole day together just 2 days before our wedding. They both said it was time for my future wife and my best friend to get to know each other better. Their day of bonding was very secretive. But at the end of the day, when they got back to the apartment, Susan just kissed me on the lips, picked up her overnight bag and said, "I love you, David. When you see me in 2 days, know that I'll be yours forever." She then left for her parents' house. My stag night consisted of Maggie and I attending a Celtic game at the garden and spending a short night in the pub enjoying the win. Maggie didn't go into detail with me about her day with Susan. She said she explained our financial situation and the prenup, which came as a surprise to me. I guess I had told her to take care of everything, which left her with quite a bit of leeway. Susan signed the necessary papers, and then they spent the day learning all they could about each other. Maggie said there were no secrets, but she didn't feel much like talking about it. By all accounts, the wedding was tasteful and fun. I'm not the person to discuss details with. I spent the day exchanging enthusiastic smiles with Maggie and looking at my beautiful wife. No one seemed bothered when Maggie stood next to me during the ceremony, or when it was time to give the best man speech. She had a lot of material to work with, but I wasn't too embarrassed by it. When she was done, the room got deathly quiet and emotional. She promised that, having known me and my family for most of my life, my parents would wholeheartedly support our marriage and love Susan. David and I have never had a fight. Not one in 15 years of marriage. People might think that's unhealthy, but it isn't. We had many disagreements, and David never shied away from discussing them. Often he felt that we had to agree on some issue in order to move forward as a couple. So we defended our position by stating all the facts as we saw them. And we kept talking until someone was left with an advantage. Sometimes it took months. But there were never harsh words, and he never raised his voice. David accepted my position as often as I accepted his. He was never one-sided. Sometimes David would say that people could have more than one option for solving a problem, even if he favored one option over another. In those cases, he would ask me questions and let me explain my reasoning. He would offer advice, but once he thought he understood my position, he was done. And he just lived with it. And in those moments when I realized much later that he was right, he wouldn't say a word. He would just hug me and tell me how much he loved me. He was quick to remind me that in the office he was the boss, and people had to do what he said. But at home, he was my partner, and we had to find solutions that worked for us, not him. It was very nice, but total bullshit. Rebecca Davis and I met for lunch every time David left on business. He had lunch with her every day he was home, and she was my office spy. She kept me informed of any problems in the office, or if David wasn't behaving normally. David knew she was giving me all the details, but he didn't care. I don't have any secrets from you, Suze. Perhaps you should acquire a network of spies. I'm getting rather forgetful in my old age. One day at lunch, Becky told me about how David had made the department heads present any proposed changes at a senior staff meeting, saying that way everyone would have an equal opportunity to ask questions and identify possible problems. But when he noticed that one of his top programmers wasn't proposing any changes, he did some reconnaissance. When he realized that this person was painfully shy and afraid of public speaking, he told him that he should give the presentation from his office via conference call so that all of his materials would be available at any time. David said that bringing everything into the conference room would be too much of a hassle. After the man gave his first successful presentation from the comfort of his office, David gave him a raise. Yes, my David was a hard ass. There was only one area in which David was completely unwilling to compromise: his total devotion to me and our family. I often told him that he didn't have to come to every concert or game and that he didn't have to be home for every dinner when he wasn't on a business trip. If staying late at work every now and then meant that he didn't have to work late or get up before the sun in his home office, or if it just meant that he had free time, we could do without it. He strongly disagreed. Suze, you and the kids are my #1 priority. How will the kids realize they are the most important thing in my life if I'm not there to show them that? No. Work will have to take a back seat. And if I can't find a way to be with my family and work, then I'll quit, sell the business, and become a stay-at-home dad. But if that happens, you might want to cook meals. We don't want my being around to be a punishment. He was trying to make a joke. It was very endearing. Suze, the most enjoyable thing for me is spending time with you and the kids. Please don't ask me to give that up. I suppose romance novel covers and ads with men work because most women fantasize about spending a stolen moment with the man of their dreams. But I woke up with that dream man every day and went to bed with him every night. My David made all those guys look like cowards. You see, my David is a boor, a real man. Soccer moms, college girls, models, movie stars. They all wanted a piece of my man, and who could blame them? But David just laughed it off. He just blew women away left and right, breaking hearts on a daily basis. He showed off his wedding ring like it had superpowers. And yet I worried about him. Not often, but enough. I hated traveling for business. When the kids were little, we could travel as a family. It was like little mini vacations throughout the year. I tried to start my day as early as possible, briefing before meetings at breakfast, scheduling presentations and meetings before noon, and moving client dinners to lunches. Susan spent her mornings with the kids at the hotel, swimming or watching movies. I tried my best to be home early in the morning. Then we would head out to explore the host city for the rest of the day. Things didn't always go according to plan. Sometimes the meetings dragged on, sometimes there were more serious problems. But mostly it was a great way to be together as a family. When Michael started school, our family mini vacations were limited to summers and vacations. As the kids got older and had their own interests and activities, mini vacations became a cherished memory. I found a compromise. Shorter trips, longer days, stacking meetings and clients one after the other. It meant my staff would have to work harder, longer, and prepare to meet with multiple clients at the same time. But when I explained the reasons, they seemed to understand, and those who had families of their own appreciated the compacted schedule. Booking travel and appointments became a logistical nightmare, but Miss Davis was my savior. I followed the itinerary she always drew up for me, down to the last detail, and I rarely had a problem. She kept track of flight schedules, weather and traffic, made any necessary changes to the dual itinerary, and 99% of the time I ended up wherever I needed to be, and most importantly, home, on time. When webcams became available on most laptops, we made them part of our standard configuration, and I started having in-room dining more often. When the webcam was on at home and mine was in the hotel room, it worked out that I spent evenings at home. We could do homework, play games, and have dinner together. It almost made traveling alone bearable. Best of all, I could pour myself a drink, chat with Susan, and wait for my favorite words. "How was your day, Suze?" "It was fine, dear." "Dave, please forgive her and let her come home." Admittedly, I wasn't surprised that all of Susan's family and friends were putting full pressure on me. "You're a good sister, Shannon. Susan would be so grateful if she knew you were here protecting her." "What would it take, Dave?" "She'll do anything you ask." "I know she will." "I'm sure she will, Shannon. But it will be an impossible task, so I won't insult her with requests." Shannon wasn't going to give up. But she was trying to find some hope in a field of lost hopes. "Jesus, Dave. One time. One mistake. Please, please, please let her come home." "It wasn't one time, Shannon." "What?" "She wasn't honest with me, so I'm not surprised she didn't tell you everything either." "But it doesn't matter. Once would have been enough. It's her reasons, not her actions that got us here. Come on, Dave. You don't have to philosophize. Tell me straight. I'm not as smart as you, and I want to prove a point. So be a gentleman and keep it on my level." I had to laugh, but smiles were much more painful these days. "Well, I'm not ready to tell you everything, Shannon. Some things have to stay just between me and your sister. But I will try to give you some information. I'm not sure it will help you, though. Give it a try, Dave. Maybe I'm smarter than we both think." Before Shannon arrived, I had gone through almost all of the photos from the 15 years Susan and I had been together. They were stacked all around me. "Tell you what, I'm going to go get a drink. Pick out some pictures of Susan. It would be better if they were taken when you were around, but it doesn't matter. When you pick out the pictures, take a minute and cover everything in the picture except Susan's eyes. Would you like a drink?" White wine would be nice." Shannon looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I was. I certainly hadn't been like myself lately. It took about 15 minutes. I brought Shannon a glass of wine. My glass consisted of 32 ounces of water with ice. "Ready?" "Sure, Dave. What do you want to show me?" "Just show me the first picture." Shannon held out the first picture. I had to admit it was a little weird. Susan was celebrating her promotion in the ICU. She worked so hard for that promotion. She was so proud of herself. Good choice. It was a fun night. Okay, that was really weird. It was like showing a complete stranger that you had a third nipple or a sixth toe. "Lucky guess?" she hummed. Shannon looked at the picture, trying to figure out how I had determined all the details. She gave up and picked up the second photo. In the first picture, she's holding Michael on the day he was born. She was so tired, but that look of unconditional love was something else. Shannon pushed the photo away more slowly this time. I'm not sure she knew what she wanted to say. Despite herself, she picked up the third one. Are you sure this is the picture you want to pick? Geez, Dave. Just tell me about the picture. Your 21st birthday. Susan tries to look confident and happy, but something knocked her out and she tried to hide it. I didn't know what it was at the time. Later, she told me that you had just drunkenly admitted to making out with your girlfriend right before you came in. Something about smearing lipstick on your lips. Holy shit. I've never lied to Susan. Never. That's just not fair. She could never lie to me, even if she wanted to. Shannon wanted to make her argument, but seemed to lose her train of thought. Shannon, do you think I'm an arrogant asshole? What? Hell no, Dave. You're the kindest, gentlest, and most humble person I've ever known. Thank you, Shannon. Your dad's a really nice guy, too. Well, that's true. Dad comes in a very close second place. Do I act like I'm God's gift to women? No, Dave. Would it shock you if I told you that I get hit on by every woman at least once a day? No, it wouldn't shock me. That's actually a pretty conservative estimate from what I've seen. Do you think I've ever cheated on your sister? She paused for a second. No, Dave, I don't think you cheated. Thank you, Shannon. That means a lot to me, even if you had to think about it a little. She giggled. Shannon, do you love your sister? More than she'll ever know. Would you ever do something that would intentionally hurt her, even if she never found out about it? God, no. I would never do anything to hurt her, Dave. Can I do it with you? Not surprisingly, there was a very similar change in their eyes. What are you asking? I'm asking if I tell you I'll take you upstairs to the bedroom. Yes, Dave, she whispered. Susan would be hurt if she found out. She doesn't have to know. And that's why I appreciate the fact that you never hit on me, Shannon. That's why I always knew you were a good person and a good sister. Shannon, I asked your sister to share my life. In return, she asked me to make a promise. She asked me to be faithful to her. I knew what I was giving up when I made that promise. Do you have any idea what I was giving up? Shannon nodded slowly. Now to the point. This was no contest. I would have given up 1,000 solid things for one chance to be with your sister. In fact, I think we both know that's exactly what I gave up, and maybe more. And I would do it again for the woman I married. But your sister isn't that woman anymore. Besides, I think we'd both agree that I have a good chance of getting anyone I want. She nodded. But I chose Susan and gave her everything I had to give. And it wasn't enough. I think she was beginning to understand. I stood up and left the room. Thanks for stopping by, Shannon. It was nice talking to you. Let yourself go, okay? I don't know how long she stayed. I fell asleep almost as soon as I got on the bed. But when I woke up the next morning, she was gone. So how did it go? It was interesting. Does he know I asked you to meet? No. I don't think so. So did you make any progress? No. I don't think so. Jesus, Shannon, is that all you have to say? Do you have anything to help me? Well, Susan, can I ask you if you told him the truth? Well, everything I told him was true, but I didn't tell him everything. Oh, well, I can tell you this. You're screwed. Before we move on, I feel like I have to address the elephant in the room. I'm not psychic and I can't read minds. I live in the real world. And while my company has worked with some very interesting technology, it's not science fiction. I haven't tried to develop special abilities that allow me to know what Susan is thinking or feeling. I didn't do that with Maggie either, for that matter. I just loved them. That love made me hypersensitive to their feelings. I have a fantastic memory. I mean, I can't tell you what page 26 is in my high school yearbook, but important things, like what my 2 favorite women participated in, I remember every single one of them. Every look, every feeling. After spending a very short time with each of them, I created a small database in my head of every facial reaction, and more importantly, their eyes. Hell, I always looked into their eyes when they were around me. So memorizing an event, their reaction to it, and the expression in their eyes was easy. Sometimes I didn't know all the details, but they could be recalled later. I would just add them to my list. After decades of knowing Maggie and 15 years with Susan, there were no surprises. I just knew, at a glance. It wasn't superhuman or anything like that, but it was something special. Maggie told me that counseling was the best option, which admittedly surprised me somewhat. During our first meeting with Susan and her attorney, I thought Maggie was adamantly opposed to counseling. She made several valid arguments for why I shouldn't go along with it. She said I would win nothing and lose everything. Emotions have no place in the practice of law, David. Emotional decisions are almost always bad decisions. Susan is distraught. She wants you back. Her lawyer is trying to give her client what she wants, not what she needs. We have no proof, David. No video, no photos, no receipts. Only very good guesses based on hearsay. I saw it in her eyes won't hold up in court. If we're going to enforce the infidelity clause in your prenup, we need proof. During your counseling sessions, Susan is going to provide us with that evidence. And since medical records, including marriage counseling records, can easily be sealed by the court, Susan will be protected. I can't do anything about the rumor mill, but all of her dirty laundry must not become public knowledge. So, as you can see, counseling will do you good, David. 2 things, Mags. Remind me never to get in your face, and thank you for taking care of Susan when I can't. When I first took over my father's firm, the staff treated me with a healthy amount of skepticism. I didn't blame them. I had an education, but I didn't have anywhere near the real-world experience that was needed for a project of this magnitude. When I spent the first 3 months learning how my father's office was now run, the staff was mostly positive. When I handed out a detailed plan of my proposed operational changes and gave everyone a month to voice their opinions, things improved. And when I spent the next 2 months analyzing that feedback with senior staff, seriously considering all of their suggestions and implementing those that were innovative, I won the room. Over the next 6 months, as I laid out my 10-year plan and vision for transforming the company from an accounting firm to a full-fledged consulting firm specializing in information management, the employees were enthusiastic, engaged, and working their butts off. Everyone was enthusiastic except Jason Smith, the head of the audit division. In the first 6 months on the job, my initial assessment of Jason Smith had not changed. He was a brilliant tax accountant and a huge asshole. The next 6 months confirmed my fears. Jason was willing to defend his turf at any cost, even at the expense of corporate progress. Heading up the tax audit department, Jason was the big man on campus and my father's right-hand man. Now, however, being responsible for only a small part, 1/3 of the entire portfolio, he was at a loss. He didn't have the necessary skills to lead larger projects, and frankly, he was barely staying afloat. Dealing with his stalling tactics was easy enough. Accounting was still our base. So I left him to run his little kingdom. As his colleagues were promoted in other areas of the business, he just stayed on the sidelines. After a year, he was no longer involved in any way in our company's transformation, and I never dealt with him as part of my day-to-day operations. A year after that, I forgot he existed at all. When Susan called his name almost 10 years later, saying he was one of my employees and a new volunteer for one of the charities she was involved with, I didn't recognize his name. Miss Davis had to look him up in the company directory. Later that week, I stopped by his office to thank him for donating his time to the charity and helping to support our company's partnership with the community. I still didn't remember who he was. It wasn't until our company picnic that I remembered. Jason came over to talk to Susan while we were refueling our guns for the annual interdivisional water battle. He just said hello, made small talk, and left. He got my attention well after the water fight was over. He and another large man, large, round, not tall, were talking to one of our freshman interns. I didn't remember her name. At first, she seemed to enjoy this casual flirting, but when Jason started getting closer and touching her hands, she seemed a little nervous. I asked Miss Davis who the intern was and, armed with her name, made my way through the crowd to where the trio was standing. I will say this. Jason Smith was a good-looking guy. Rumor had it that he was doing fitness modeling to get a part-time job in college. I had no doubt the rumors were true. He definitely looked the part. Stop thinking about me like that. I don't. God, you're just like my dad. Hey, Jason. It's good to see you. Who's your friend? I asked, pointing to the man standing next to him. Hello, Mr. Stevens. This is my friend Big Mike. Mike Thomas. Nice to meet you, Mike. I hope you enjoyed the picnic. Say, Molly, if now is a good time, can we talk to my wife about the children's literacy group you asked me about earlier? Now is as good a time as any, Mr. Stevens. Lead the way. I'll see you guys around. It was nice to meet you both. I'm sure the dynamic duo were furious as we left, but we didn't stop to check. Once we were out of sight, ending up on the other side of the carnival tent, I stopped and held out my hand. David Stevens, Miss Stewart. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please, Mr. Stevens, this is Molly, and believe me, it's a pleasure. Thank you for that. No problem, Molly. Do you have a way home? Yes, sir, I do. But if it's not too much trouble, I'd like to talk to your wife about this literacy program. I know that volunteering is high on the company's list of priorities. Well, I'm sure she's around here somewhere. Molly and Susan chatted for the rest of the afternoon as I said goodbye to them. On the way home, Susan seemed a little annoyed. Molly is a very nice woman, but a bit young for you, don't you think? Well, you know me, I always want something new. She didn't laugh. Anyway, I just got her out of an uncomfortable situation. Speaking of which, do you work closely with Jason Smith on any of your charities? I run into him from time to time, but we don't work together that often. Why do you ask? I just have a bad feeling about this guy, Suze. Nothing concrete. Oh, David, that's a little too much paranoia, don't you think? Maybe. She seemed to want to say something else. Honestly, I have no idea what she would have actually said. But in retrospect, I thought that was the moment our marriage was doomed. Did she want to pop the question to me? Did she need reassurance? I love my life, but sometimes I wish she would have told me everything on her mind. But she left it at that, and I'll never know. Amanda Skinner was an interesting woman. She looked like she could have been at home in the woods somewhere, squatting quietly for days on end, hoping to peek at the mating habits of squirrels. But she had a doctorate in psychology and was a certified marriage and family therapist with 20 years of experience. According to Maggie, she was the best. As much as I appreciated Maggie's legal maneuvers, I also understood that she really wanted the counseling to work. She wanted me along with Susan. I didn't understand her thinking, mostly because we'd never talked about it, but I knew it was true. After the formal introductions, Mandy, that's what she insisted we be called, took a seat in an armchair directly across from the coffee table and across from the large, comfortable couch where Susan and I were sitting. The atmosphere here was very homey, almost like having a cup of coffee at a friend's house. Not at all like counseling. Okay, let's start by identifying the differences in our expectations. What do you hope to get out of our time together? Susan, you first. Well, I want to be able to get back to my husband. I want him to find it in his heart to forgive me and let me come home. And I want him to stop the divorce. Very good, Susan. David? I want Susan to feel that she's been given every opportunity to change my mind so that she doesn't feel like she's left something in the locker room. I want her to get to the point where she can accept what's going to happen. And I want to move on with my life. Interesting choice, David. Okay, what do each of you consider to be the biggest problem in your marriage? Susan? I cheated on David. It's all my fault. Susan sounded like she was about to cry, but somehow it didn't bother me. Okay. David? Honesty. Okay. Thank you. I see no reason why we shouldn't see what progress we can make by meeting together. It may be necessary to meet with you separately at some point, but I think that for now, joint sessions will do just fine. Can we meet every week at this time? That time suits me just fine, Mandy, Susan stated. Whatever you say, Doc. I had already formed my opinion of Dr. Skinner. She wasn't going to listen to me. She was looking at Susan intently, but she seemed to already know everything she needed to know about me. Since my presence was not necessary, I thought that imposing courtesies for voluntary counseling was too much. I prefer Mandy or Dr. Skinner if necessary, David. Of course, Doc. I'll see you next week. With those words, I walked out the door. To my face, everyone was telling me that I was handling the situation so well. Behind my back, they were saying that I was moving forward so fast that I must have a little business on the side. The truth is, no matter how hard you try, you can't control the rumor mill. But like so many other evenings lately, I was going home to cry. I knew it, and I'm not at all ashamed to share it with you. Being in the same room with Susan was very hard, mostly because I wanted to hug her and take her home with me. A little bit because I wanted to kill her and hide her body. I might have lost my mind if I didn't have kids. They were very upset, but as I comforted them, I remembered all the good things about Susan. Why can't Mommy come home, Daddy? She loves you so much, Daddy. She's always crying. Ever heard the phrase, wrap it around your little finger? In my case, it's 2 little fingers. Fingers attached to my beautiful twin daughters. Twins who were strikingly similar to the woman who owned my heart. What did she do, Daddy? That was it. My boy. Straight to the point. Well, he's his father's son. That young man will stay between me and your mother. It had to be something bad, Dad. Luke Finch said his father told him his mother was a crazy bitch when she moved out of his house. We know how to spell bitch, Mikey. We're not stupid, I heard in the stereo. It always amazed me how synchronized they were. We've had enough of the language, guys. Michael, if you ever hear someone say a rude word about your mother, I can promise you it won't be from me. And they better not say it if I'm within earshot. Guys, I know this is hard for you to understand. But sometimes moms and dads find out they can't live together anymore. But that doesn't mean your mom loves you any less. It doesn't mean I love you any less. And it doesn't mean we won't always be a family. It just means we're going to have to work really hard to work out different logistics. What logistics, Daddy? The kind where you can see Mommy or me anytime you want, angels. They were all very sad. It was hard for them to accept, but they were kind enough to keep it to themselves. I know what's bothering you, David. This was the fourth counseling session, and it was getting a little tiring. We were no closer to Susan accepting what was about to happen. She was still denying everything. I was beginning to worry about her. The longer this dragged on, the bigger the blow it became. I knew she could no longer be my wife, but the children needed a mother. Michael would soon be a teenager, and the twins had just celebrated their 11th birthdays. Susan's recovery was going to take some time. There was no way I could handle raising 3 teenagers alone. I needed Susan's help. We had to become co-parents. However, the focus of our counseling sessions was me and my ability to forgive. I just couldn't grasp the concept. David, when an abused spouse learns the full details of their partner's infidelity, it can be a huge blow to their ego. Your feelings of inadequacy are completely understandable. Your anger at Susan is understandable. But if you won't talk about your feelings, I can't help you deal with them, and we won't make any progress. I hadn't had much experience with therapists, or any therapists for that matter. I had led a pretty blessed life, but I couldn't get away from the idea that the bitch was clueless about anything. I kept complaining to Maggie, but she kept telling me that Dr. Skinner was the best and that therapy was the best option. It took 3 sessions before Susan admitted that she had something more with Jason Smith. She cried and apologized, blah, blah, blah. I believed her, but that wasn't the main problem. Oh, it hurt a lot, but that wasn't the issue. I'm not mad at Susan, Doc. I'm sad because my marriage to Susan is over. There are no magic words that will change that. Susan made mistakes. I've forgiven her. Our marriage is over, and that saddens me deeply, but I will heal with time. I need more time, not more discussions. And, Doc, I don't feel inferior. I knew everything I needed to know about her affairs long before she admitted them to you. She was having intimacy with Jason Smith, blah, blah, blah. Okay, all right. That fat bastard gave her chlamydia. Anyway, I just don't give a shit. They weren't better lovers than me. Hell, Susan didn't even like doing it with either of them. But that's not the point. If Susan had just gotten drunk, lost her temper, victimized some womanizer, I promise you that whatever problems that situation caused, we would never have ended up in your office. Mr. Stevens, you're making a lot of assumptions about issues we haven't even begun to consider. I approve of your attempt to cover your pain with false bravado, but you can't know how Susan feels about her affair with Mr. Smith. Last week, she barely acknowledged its existence, and our session time is over. We haven't even begun to discuss these topics. Yes, I know how she feels. How? Susan told me. The room exploded with indignation. I needed a moment of quiet to gather my thoughts. I didn't tell you any such thing, David. Mr. Stevens, please. This isn't helping. I tried to put my hands up in the air to calm the ladies down. At that moment, they caught my eye and I pointed to an item on the doctor's bookshelf. Doc, what are those headphones for? They're sound-absorbing headphones. I use them to work with children who have behavioral problems. I use them to better assess the child's response to visual stimuli. Excellent. Doc, can we agree that we're not making any progress? We're not making progress, Mr. Stevens. That's for sure. Okay, fine. I'll offer you a deal. For the next 10 minutes, we do therapy my way. Then I'll have 5 minutes to explain my actions. After that, I'll do whatever you say. Answer any questions you have for however many sessions it takes. Deal? That's a very unusual request. But I don't see anything wrong with breaking this logjam any way we can. Fine. For the next 10 minutes, you may speak to Susan on any topic you wish. I will monitor your discussion and use headphones so I can't hear what you're talking about. All I ask is that you keep your pen up when you change the subject. That will help me keep track of what's going on. And Susan, if you could keep your mouth hidden behind the magazine when you speak, that would be helpful. I don't want to be accused of reading lips. Okay, let's get started. And I began to observe. For 10 minutes in silence. And I was sad. This was the end. At the end of 10 minutes, I got a condescending look from Dr. Skinner and a confused look from my soon-to-be ex-wife. You have the floor, Mr. Stevens. Okay, the first subject is me. She loves me. She's happy in our marriage. She wants to stay married. The second theme is the children. Unconditional love for Michael and the twins. A mother's love is amazing, don't you think? The third theme, I have no idea, but whatever it was, she told you the truth. By the way, what was it? I asked her who she thought would win the presidential election. I see. We don't talk politics much. It's not very interesting. Anyway, she said there's no way the American voters would elect a corrupt ex-Chicago city manager as president. Unfortunately, I said she told you the truth. Not that she was right. God help us all. To say both women were shocked is an understatement. Perhaps outright disbelief? Stunned silence for sure. So, topic 4. She lied. And theme 5. She desperately wants to believe it's true, because admitting the truth would be devastating. There were still tears in Susan's eyes, but she tried to hold herself together. Doc sat with his mouth open. No, don't. No way. Not my type. Susan, I've never lied to you. Never. I've always told you that you've always deserved 100% honesty from me. That it would be unfair not to tell you the truth, and that you would get it, even if I knew the truth would hurt your feelings. And I told you that you would have no reason to lie to me, that I love you unconditionally, and that the truth would help us find a solution to any problem much faster. And I promised that I would help you find that solution no matter what. The car. I'm sorry. What? The day of the PTA meeting. I wrecked my car. It was your present and I felt bad. I didn't want to tell you I wrecked the car. I wanted us to take your car so I could have more time. I rehearsed my excuses for 30 minutes, but no sooner had I started explaining, you were already giggling. You knew and weren't paying attention before I even opened my mouth. That's why you were laughing. Yes, Susan. Yes, Susan. I'm really sorry about that. I should have told you that you couldn't lie to me. But you never lied anyway, so I didn't pay much attention to it. Shannon was right. I'm totally screwed, she whispered. Susan, how did a Big Mike convince you to do that? He didn't. What does Jason have? Videos, pictures? He has video. All 3 minutes of it. And why did you panic and try to find a way to get me to cheat on you? Rebecca Davis saw me leaving the hotel. We were supposed to have lunch. You were out of town, and she and I always have lunch. But I forgot, and she saw me. I knew it was a matter of time, and I knew what it would mean. 4th subject, Doc. In the books. He has it on video, Maggie. I need that video, and I want it taken care of. I'll take care of it, David. I'm serious, Maggie. I want it done soon, or you'll have a chance to test your skills as a lawyer. Because if I have to do it, I'm going to take that bastard down. I understand, David. The next day when I got home from work, there were 2 plain manila envelopes on my desk. I stared at them for a long time. Finally, after lunch, I gave up. One envelope contained Jason Smith's resignation letter and a signed 10-year non-competition agreement. The second was probably a DVD. The size and shape were appropriate. Anything else, Mr. Stevens? Yes, Miss Davis, thank you. Please take this to Human Resources and have them post a job announcement for a senior tax accountant. And destroy the contents of this envelope. I will personally destroy it, Mr. Stevens. Thank you, Becky. Okay, David, you were right. You seem to be very aware of the problems we are facing. But it's obvious that Susan regrets what she did. She's willing to work hard to repair your relationship. You obviously still love her. She is clearly completely and utterly in love with you. There's a lot to build off of. I believe that's all true, Doc. But none of it matters. Okay, so what's holding you back? What can we do to move you toward a possible reconciliation? An impossible task. I wouldn't even ask. Rhyme, for God's sake. Things were quickly going downhill. I was really going to talk to Maggie about her judgment. Who the hell certified Amanda Skinner as a therapist, and where the hell she studied? Oh, here it is? University of Notre Dame. Damn straight. Susan, what made you finally give up? I'm sorry, David. I don't understand. I'm wondering why it took you so long to give up. I don't think a slow drip like that would have been all that convincing. I'm wondering what made you change your mind. David, I don't understand. I'm sorry, Susan. What was the trick Jason Smith showed you that finally freed you from your vows? I mean, he worked for 5 years to get in on you. That's a lot of effort for any ass. Even for yours, Susan. You have to admire the asshole's tenacity. I'm wondering how he finally managed. 5 years? Oh, David, it wasn't that long. Of course it was, Susan. He came to your attention when he started volunteering for your charities. You even mentioned it to me. I even thanked your buddy for his efforts. I remember it well. Are you telling me you don't remember? I remember, David. Good. Then I want to ask you, after 5 years of Susan, you're so beautiful. Susan, we'd be so good together. Susan, you're so special. What made you change your mind? Unless, of course, you've been having fun for years. No, David, it was just one time. We only did it once. Well, yes, for 3 minutes. My mistake. So what did he do? How did he win the beautiful princess? I don't know, David. I can't remember. We're getting into deep shit with the 5th theme, Doc. Perhaps you should start paying attention. Susan, is it possible that you can't answer the question because he didn't do anything else? Yes, David. It is possible. You see, Doc? Susan has only lied to me 3 times. Pretty impressive when you're talking about a relationship like ours, but it's also the reason we're getting a divorce. Mr. Stevens, what are you talking about? Jesus, Doc. Pay attention. 3 lies. Once about the reservation. Once about the car accident. And once when she told me about one of her buddies but didn't tell me about the other. 3 lies in 15 years. I still don't understand what's holding you back, Mr. Stevens. She told the truth, Doc. That's why. Why, Susan? I don't know, David. I honestly don't know. She's not really a lesbian. You know that, don't you? What are you talking about now, Susan? I'm talking about Maggie, David. Okay, Susan. I agreed to keep seeing you because Dr. Skinner said it would be helpful, but if you insist on stabbing me with needles during every conversation, I'm going to have to stop coming to see you. I know I've done that before, David. I was just trying to get you to talk to me. Even arguing with you was better than sitting in silence. I'm not doing that now. She's in love with you. She always has been. She told the truth, Doc. That's why we're getting a divorce. Susan was in a panic. It was brutal to watch. I'd managed to keep my emotions in check as I forced myself to sit through 4 weeks of therapeutic crap. But this was real. The end? It was hard to watch, even harder to participate. Susan was devastated, and so was I. My father used to tell me, "Put it all on the table, son. Even if we can't solve the problem today, it will be better if we all know we have a problem and what the problem is, so we can start looking for a solution. 2 brains are better than 1, and your mom's brain is better than both of ours combined. So tell us about your problem, so your mom can tell us how to solve it." It may be simplistic, but the philosophy of joy is multiplied, and sorrow is shared seems to have worked very well for Susan and me. When Susan and I first started dating, we would talk for hours. I guess like everyone in the days of young love. But as we got more and more serious, we talked even more. And when we realized that we were both deeply committed to each other, we continued to talk about everything. Always without any secrets. I always loved that I could look into my wife's eyes, ask her how her day was, and realize that she was truly content with her life. I was very proud that I could make her so happy. Obviously, communication is not a problem in your relationship, Mr. Stevens. You should take that as a positive sign. You'd think so, but my problem is that she didn't lie. I was at the conference for 7 days. Every day I asked my wife, "How was your day, Suze?" And every day she answered, "It was fine, dear." Tears were running down Susan's cheeks, and there was a strange expression in her eyes. Every day, I saw her eyes. She was telling the truth. Even the day she had 3 minutes of fun with Jason Smith, whatever that day was. Even that day, everything was okay. There was no worry, no remorse. She didn't worry about it. She didn't care. She cheated on me with another man, and she didn't care. I can live with a lot of things, Doc. But I won't live with a wife who decided it was okay to cheat on me. I won't live with a woman who thinks it's okay. No real man wants to be married to a whore. Well, maybe some do, but I don't. Since I knew the end was near, I was prepared for the worst, I thought. Screaming, pleading, and crying, that's for sure. But I wasn't prepared for catatonia. It was a little unnerving. Dr. Skinner seemed calm, but watched Susan's reaction carefully. After a moment, she stood up, took my hand, and led me to the door. Thank you, David. I think that's all for today. Now I understand why Maggie referred you and your wife to me. You shouldn't worry too much about her. I will take very good care of Susan. Thank you, Dr. Skinner. I would appreciate it if you would let me know if there is anything I can do to help. Susan is the mother of my children and will always be very important to me. I will, David. I think it's time for you to go. I'm not really a self-righteous asshole. I know it may seem that way, but I'm really not. From the moment I met Susan, everything I did was for us. It was easy for me to keep myself honest. I was working for a higher power, for Susan and her love. Over the past few weeks, I've been studying one topic. Why do marriages fail? I was desperately searching for an answer to a very serious question. How had I failed Susan? What had I done to push her away from me? After reading 27 books, I realized 2 things. I could write a book on how to keep my marriage alive and well, but I would never find the answer. I hadn't done anything about it. And that made me sad. All the advice in each book I followed. Communication, honesty, caring. Putting her needs before my own, letting her be herself. Flowers, notes, remembering the little things. Sharing responsibilities. Adapting to life changes. Loyalty. I've done all of these things. Again, I'm not saying I'm perfect, far from it. On my own, I am weak. It was Susan who gave me the strength. I did all the little things because they made her happy, and when Susan was happy, I was beyond happy. I did everything for her because she energized me. Naturally, this was reflected in our children as well. They were an extension of my love for Susan and deserved everything I had to offer. Some men might call it all a big sacrifice. I gave up my dream for my family. But not me. I thought it was easy. Susan and my family were my dream, and everything I gave up was returned to me tenfold. My biggest problem was that if I couldn't find anything I did wrong, I would have to change myself to stay married to Susan. I was honest, loyal, loving, and kind. I couldn't be a man with an open relationship. I would never be a cuckold. That word alone was making me nauseous. I desperately needed to find out how I had failed so I could make peace with my wife, to forgive myself for my failure, forgive her for hers, and move on together. My current depressed lifestyle was based on the realization that I would never find that failure. Another thing that bothered me was that all my memories of the last 5 years together were tainted. It's amazing how things that seem so innocent when your eyes are full of love can seem so insidious when you look at them through the lens of resentment, anger, and betrayal. Susan and I did a lot of walking, dancing, going to parties and the like. Things that never bothered me before were now eating me up inside. Times when she may have danced a little too closely with another man. The smiles, the laughter, the touching of another's hand. I'd never cared about flirting before. It was a harmless amusement. But now I wondered if my indifference to these things had cost my marriage. Was I my own worst enemy? It was Maggie who nearly forced me to continue counseling. You have to fight with all your might, David. You have to try to make things work. When you've tried absolutely everything, then and only then can you give up. That's the way it has to be. You can't live with yourself if you don't, she said. I reluctantly agreed. I stayed close by while Dr. Skinner worked with Susan, trying to deal with her depression and come to terms with the state our marriage was in. From time to time, Susan and I visited each other. We maintained a friendly relationship, talking about children, family, and friends. We never talked about ourselves. At first, it seemed like Susan was talking to pick a fight with me. I know she was upset. Heck, so was I. But my frustration was expressed in short answers and silence, and she didn't like it. The divorce proceedings continued, but were postponed until a final decision was made, until Maggie was satisfied that I had done everything I could. Maggie and I talked after each counseling session. She listened to me complain that I was fed up with everything and wanted it to be over. No, not today, David. You're not ready yet. And so I found myself back in Dr. Skinner's office talking about reconciliation and forgiveness. Jesus, Susan, give me something to work with. Why did you do this? Why? For God's sake, give me a reason. I was on the verge of a breakdown. It was almost too much. Everything was too perfect, David. I couldn't go on. What? I couldn't live up to the standard. I'm a human being. I have flaws. I am a woman. I have temptations. Dr. Skinner was silent. She was going to leave it at that. It was clear to me that things had been settled between them for a long time. This was going to lead me to a denouement, and not one I wanted. Well, knowing what I know now, knowing what it would cost, I would never have done it. But at the time, I didn't think about it. I was caught up in the excitement of what I thought I was going to get. Not a miserable reality, but the results can't dampen my intentions. I'll never understand why or how you did it. Hell, I'd sleep with half the women who hit on you. And I don't play on that team. But you never played, did you? And because I was with you, men hit on me. What kind of woman would I have to be to keep a man like you? I had to be crazy good in bed, right? Some kind of special. You were special. I could barely speak through my tears. Kind of like a whore. At first it was nice, then it was draining. And then, well, who knows? I just gave up. All my friends thought you were too good to be true. From the very first time we met. It's only gotten worse over the years. My husband, a piece of shit, has got himself a little business on the side, and he's not half as good as David. He's rich, Susan. He's just very secretive. No man could stand to have so many women throwing themselves at him and not give up. I did it for you. Oh, I know that. I realized it the moment you confronted me. You can't pretend to be that devastated. I realized in that moment that you really never cheated on me, never lied to me. You were angry. Very angry, and that kind of pain only comes with real betrayal. Dr. Skinner showed me that. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, darling. I cheated on you. I chose this. I wasn't satisfied. I'm not happy with the results, but it was my decision. Dr. Skinner spoke for the first time. We have to be accountable for our decisions and the consequences of our actions. The walls were closing in. It was getting hard to breathe. It's not your fault, David. Not directly. It was my mistake, my obsession, my lack of faith. It's all right. You can forget about it now. I'll understand. I needed to move. Susan, Dr. Skinner, I have to go now. I'm really sorry about this. I can't stay. Goodbye, Susan. And I walked out the door and into my new life. Alone. That was really good, Susan. I'm proud of you. I know it's been difficult. But by fully accepting our responsibilities, we have laid a foundation on which to build. It will be easier next time. He's upset, but now we can move forward. He's not coming back, Dr. Skinner. That's all there is to it. Don't give up hope, Susan. We've come this far. No, I haven't lost hope. Only in David. She'll help him now. She loves him. He won't come back. She warned me not to hurt him. She said she would help me. And she did. But he's not coming back. Who? Maggie. She's in love with you. She always has been. What in God's name are you talking about now? Just don't drive me away, David. She'll still love you now. But we have children. We'll always be connected. I know I can't have you and I won't try to get you back. But please don't shut me out. I can't live like this. I can't. I didn't want to relive the last session. I didn't want to talk about it. Luckily, I didn't have to. She just looked at me. Okay, David. It's over now. I'll finish up. Oh, Mags. She rushed to catch me and held me while I cried. And I did cry a lot. And back off if you say you never did. From that point on, my life went into some sort of unhealthy spin. There were no protracted court battles. Maggie got the prenup enforced. Then we met with Susan and her attorney. I was generous. I wanted to give her more, but Susan disagreed. She said that as long as she could live comfortably and see her children, anything else was excessive, and she didn't deserve it. She asked that I let her continue with her charity work, saying it would give her something to focus on. That, and the small salary she could earn there, would allow her to stay content. Our marriage was over. Susan and I still met once or twice a month, mostly to talk about nothing. And then she dropped her bombshell. I went home to my apartment. It was more of a high-end bachelor pad. I was wasted. I never took in anyone but Maggie and the kids. Maggie, as always, was there when I got home. We looked at each other for a long time. She was very concerned and sighed heavily, letting out an even bigger sigh. Let's talk about this. Okay? Sure, Mags. Here? No, let's go into the living room. We walked silently to the kitchen and grabbed drinks and appetizers. We moved in harmony without speaking. She sat directly across from me in a huge chair. She seemed so small, tucking her legs under her. My uncle molested me when I was 6 years old. I was shocked. I hadn't expected the conversation to start with that. It was 4 months of my life that changed me forever. I never talked about it with anyone except the DA, my parents, and my therapist. We tried to stay in San Francisco in our family home. But that's where it happened most often, and I couldn't get rid of the nightmares. After a year of therapy, my father got a transfer to Chicago, and that's when we moved into the house across the street from you. For over a year, I didn't talk to any boys or men except my father. And then I met you. Your family came to greet us. I watched them from the stairs for a long time. I watched you. You were different. I couldn't explain it. I still can't. But I knew you were different. I didn't know you saw me until you slipped past my parents and up the stairs. Hi, I'm David. I'm so glad you're here. We're the only kids on the whole block. We can be friends and go to school together. You're gonna love it here. We can have so much fun. What's your name? From that moment on, you became my best friend. For over a year, I was scared and lonely, and then you came along. My own guardian angel. I felt safe. I was surprised, but my parents were stunned. Do you remember the look on their faces when they saw our conversation? Not really. I was too busy talking to you. I smiled. I know. I remember. I never lied to you, David. I've always loved you and you've always known it. I couldn't hide it from you. I just never told you that I was in love with you. Honestly, it just never came up. You were and still are my best friend and the only person I truly trusted. You helped me more than you will ever know. You were so kind, gentle, and sweet. I never wanted to be separated from you. When we got older and you grew into such a handsome man, I realized I had fallen in love with you. But I had too many unresolved issues. Besides, you weren't interested in other girls. So I never worried about that. I had you all to myself and the other guys would leave me alone. None of them were ever going to try to compete with you. Honestly, I think they were relieved. You were always with me, so the other girls were looking for someone else. And that made the guys happy. I never told you I was gay. What I said was true. I'm not interested in dating guys. Well, with other guys anyway. I just never corrected your thinking. I can't have kids, David. My uncle took care of that. I know you better than anyone, and I knew you wanted to have a family, especially after your parents died. I couldn't be the one to keep you from your dream. When you found Susan, I knew you were in love, and I was so happy for you. I would never do anything to come between you. Never. I told Susan before your wedding that I was in love with you. I also told her that she never had to worry about me and that I would help her keep you no matter what. But I also told her that if she ever hurt you and you were never together again, I would take my shot. I would wait forever without a single regret. She paused. She told you about me, didn't she? Yes, just this afternoon. I was stunned. I recognized it. Margaret Peterson was my best friend. Always had been and always would be. She loved me and I always knew it. I had always loved her and she knew it. I would do anything for her and she would do the same for me. She was breathtakingly beautiful. She waited silently for me to realize my dream. Now I have children. She fought all my attempts to end the marriage until I was convinced it could never be repaired. I accepted the divorce. She wanted me and I wanted her. Our first kiss, when we were more than friends, was truly magical. It was the culmination of years of friendship, caring, and love. It took my breath away. Shortly afterward, we went to the bedroom for the first time. That night will always be special to me. Since it was the first time for Maggie, it was as traumatic as it was loving. That's all I can say about it. I will simply say that Maggie Stevens is the most beautiful woman in the world, and I don't think anyone who has ever seen her would argue with me. Susan remains a part of our lives. She and Mags work together on many of the charities our foundation supports. She shares all the holidays with us and the children. True to her word, she has never tried to get me back, and I have never treated her any differently than as a loving mother to my children. Don't worry, I can hear your angry cries from here. My revenge was lame. I should have done more. You know, I think in the fantasy world, things always work out in the hero's favor. But in the real world, violent people go to prison. Jason is out of a job and out of a career. It was all the revenge I needed. If Susan hadn't decided to cheat on me, I wouldn't have had to worry about him. Mike was a loser, and he was still a loser. You can't make someone feel like a bigger loser if they've never been a winner. Susan, well, I love her. Always have, always will. The fact that we can't be together hurts me as much as it hurts her. Sure, Maggie's presence in my life has alleviated a lot of my problems. But she has always been there for me and always will be. Making Susan suffer more than just losing our marriage would have been impossible. It was enough. Pain is pain, and you can't focus its effects on one person and not be affected by it yourself. Better to try to move on and find as much happiness as possible. Anyway, Susan doesn't seem to be dating, but we never talked about it. For the most part, she is happy and content with her life. Every once in a while, I realize that she misses me and our life together. I know because I can see it in her eyes. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.